Alright, so today's lesson we have solving right triangles. And this is just figuring out the sides and angles to a triangle, usually using trigonometry. So even though this isn't the easiest lesson, it's very repetitive. It's going to be the same couple of steps for every problem. So first you look at what do you have or what can you use. So for every trig problem we want one angle and two sides. So for this first one our angle is 31 and our two sides are x and 10. And the first question we have to ask is, how do these sides relate to the angle? Well, from 31, if we go across the triangle, we're going to call x the opposite side. And the 10, because it's next to the 31, but it's not the hypotenuse, 10 is going to be the adjacent side. So once you label the sides like that, you need to think what trig function involves the opposite and the adjacent. And you do this using SOHCAHTOA. The end of that, TOA, T-O-A, has an O and an A, so tangent is going to be using the opposite and the adjacent. So to set up our equation, it's going to be tangent of 31 is equal to the opposite, which is x, over the adjacent, which is 10. So whatever tangent of 31 is, it's going to be equal to x over 10. And now we have to solve the equation. And it's a little weird, what do you do with this tangent of 31? But essentially this is just going to come out to some decimal in our calculator. If we were to type it in, it would come out to 0.6. So all this is saying is 0.6 is equal to x over 10. So to get x by itself, all we have to do is multiply both sides of the equation by 10. And we get x is equal to 10 times the tangent of 31, or 10 times 0.6. We type this into our calculator, and we get x is going to be 6. So all we did was label the sides, set up an equation, and solve that equation, and we were able to figure out the side length to a triangle. So for this next one here, 74 is an angle we have, so we could use 74. And now we have to label this x and the 19. Are they the opposite, the adjacent, or the hypotenuse? Well, the x is across from the right angle, so the x is going to be our hypotenuse. And the 19 is next to the 74, so the 19 is going to be the adjacent. So what trig function uses the adjacent and the hypotenuse? That's going to be SOHCAHTOA. So it's going to be CAH, which is cosine. So we would say cosine of 74 is equal to the adjacent 19 over x. Now solving for x in this equation is a little bit weird. So what we're actually going to do here is we're going to multiply both sides by x. And what's going to end up happening is the left side of our equation is just going to be x times the cosine of 74. On the right side, these x's will cancel out. And we're left with x times cosine of 74 is equal to 19. So now to get this new x by itself, we divide both sides by the trig function. We divide both sides by cosine of 74. And on the left side, the trig functions cancel out. And we have x is equal to 19 over cosine of 74. So now we can type this into our calculator. 19 divided by cosine of 74. We type this into a calculator and we get 68.9. Normally one decimal place is okay for these. So the good news for trig problems where you're solving for a side length, these are the only two types of problems you can get. Either it's going to work out kind of nice where you get this x in the numerator, in which case you just multiply the 10 over and you have what x is. Or it's going to be kind of ugly where the x is in the bottom and you have to multiply it over and then divide something to the other side. It's going to be those same steps though for every problem where we're missing a side. So if you ever have to solve for a side to the triangle, it's going to be one of these two things here. A little different is here where we have to solve for the angle. We start with the same steps where, okay, we have this angle which is called theta, which is just like an x but for angles. And we start by setting up their equation. So the 51 is opposite, and the 55 is the hypotenuse. So we could say, using SOHCAHTOA, the sine of theta, or the sine of whatever that angle is equal to 51 over 55. Now in this case here, whenever you want to figure out what an angle is, what we have to use is the sine inverse button. And this is the button that has the -1 on the calculator. And we type that button and we put 51 over 55 into that function. And when we type this in, this is just going to tell us what the angle is. In this case, the angle is just 68 degrees. If you want to try out B, just feel free to pause the video, and I'll put the answer up on the screen in just a second. So this one came out to 45.3 degrees. And this is pretty much everything you're going to see to this chapter. The only time where it gets tougher is when it asks you to figure out multiple sides to the triangle. So in this case, it's not going to be any tougher. All that changes is it's two problems in one. So let's say we want to figure out what A is. Well, we have A, we know this angle's 32, we know the side's 24.5, but we don't know what B is. So first we just ignored B. And now we could figure out what A is by saying that sine of 32 is equal to the opposite, which is A, over the hypotenuse, which is 24.5. And now we can go through and solve this equation for what A is. I'll give you a second to try it, then I'll put the answer up on the screen. In this case, A is just 13.0. And now we could repeat the problem, but this time instead of looking at A, we look at B and 24.5. We do this and we get B is 20.8.